Nothing like a panic attack to liven up the old weekend.
Hey, poor! Hey, poor! Hey, poor! You don't have to be poor anymore! Jesus is here!
The loudspeaker spoke up and said, Christianity is stupid.
Greetings, fellow worker slaves, podcasting at 128 kilobits from the Fortress of Squalitude, not far from the redneck Mecca. This is the Atheist in the Trailer Park podcast. I'm your host, Tucker. Professor Fuzznuts is somewhere, I don't know where. I'm not sure where Buttons is. Leela is curled up sitting on top of the computer staring at me. And Duracell is making a loaf in the middle of the living room. When I say making a loaf, I mean the cat position referred to as a loaf, not crapping on the floor. Yes, it's a podcast hosted by a guy and his cats. Get over it. And this is not only a late episode, but a special episode because it has been a hectic week and a bit of a panicked weekend. Those of you who listened to the message I sent out last week will know that I wasn't getting much sleep because the landlord had his guys ripping my deck roof off and replacing it. He also started trapping the feral cats and taking them to the pound. Not something I was terribly thrilled with, but I can't really argue with him about it. I had explained to him that I was in the process of getting them fixed, since I couldn't get a rescue to come get them, nor could I get the pound to get them. But that didn't seem to make any difference to him. Not that I blame him on that. I mean, there's a bunch out there, and, I would have gotten rid of them before this, like if I had a car, but I don't, and I couldn't get anyone to come out. I have a friend who will bring me cat carriers, so if I catch them, I can take them to the neuter place, but he won't bring me out the have a heart traps to catch him to take him to the neuter place. So there's a whole bunch that are just so feral I can't even get close to them. That, they haven't been done yet, and those largely have been the ones he's caught. Now, there's two issues that caused my big old panic attack this weekend. The first was that on, Thursday it looked like the workmen were all done with everything as far as the deck goes. Now, the thing I discovered is that, they threw out a bunch of my stuff that was on the deck. Now, there was a table that was in bad shape, and I had been debating about, putting a new top on it. If they'd have thrown that out, I wouldn't care. But they threw out a table that was perfectly good, a chair that was good. They threw out flower pots that had nothing wrong with them. And the landlord didn't say anything to me about, well, we got to have all this stuff cleared off the deck. I figured they'd be able to do it, work around it, or at least move it. No, they pulled it all off the deck, which would have been fine. But like I said, they threw out a bunch of stuff, and they hauled it off before I even got home. So I got home, and I'm like, where's all my stuff? And then I see some of it's on the other side, on the back side of the deck. And then I noticed that, shit, there's a bunch of stuff missing. Not particularly thrilled about it, but, I can't bitch. And then Friday morning I get up, or not morning, Friday afternoon I get up, and I find that, for some reason known only to him and nothing he ever discussed with me, he's had the front steps of the deck ripped out and replaced. I don't know why. There wasn't anything wrong with the steps that were there. I'd build them, they're not maybe 3 years old, 4 at the most. But, so, and he didn't say anything about that. So, I'm gonna, I'm going to have to pay for those, I'm sure, even though it's not something I wanted. It's not something we discussed. The deck roof, I don't mind because that needed to be replaced, and it was going to be a while before I'd be able to get to it. The stairs, I don't know why I did it. I can't call him because he doesn't answer his phone. It all goes to voicemail, and he never calls anybody back, so far as I've been able to tell. If I can get by his office when he's in, I can talk to him about it, but with my schedule right now, I don't know how practical that'll be, and so he's, and who knows when he's going to be in and all that. The other issue is, he's trapping the feral cats. Like, I'm not happy that they're going to the pound. I prefer they go to a rescue, but, they do need to be out of here. But what has me concerned is it was easy enough for me to round up Leela and get her inside the house, so I didn't have to worry about her getting snagged. And she's got her ear clipped, so it's obvious that she's been fixed. Duracell, who's a cat I've had for 10 years, I think I've mentioned him before, he was mostly an indoor cat until an ex of mine moved in, and then he decided he'd rather be an outdoor cat. And then and after she moved out, he didn't want to come back in. And he's disappeared on me for a year at least, before. And then he just showed up one day, and he was with a look on his face like, "You are still going to feed me, right?" So, but what happened is I couldn't get him right away, and the landlord was already putting traps out. Well, he got snagged in one of the traps. So, I don't think anybody saw me spring him, but as soon as I sprung him, I brought him inside the house and reset the trap, and that trap did catch one of the other cats. Now, cat it caught was one that had been fixed, but they didn't bother to clip her ear for some reason. So, there's no way I have any evidence of her having been fixed, and I wasn't going to raise the issue with the landlord saying, "Hey, let's let this one go. It's been fixed. It's not going to make any more babies." Because Buttons and Fuzz Nuts are fine inside. Leela doesn't mind being in every now and then, but Duracell does not like being in. He's upset. He's scared. He's not eating right, and he's crapping all over the floor at times, which I'm having to clean up when I can find it. Now, I'm not going to mention to the landlord that I sprung him from the trap. Unless the landlord says, "Well, somebody saw you take one of the cats out of the trap." But then I'll tell him, and, hopefully that'll be okay. But I know it's, and I don't know what his response to any of this is going to be. He may just decide to evict me. Of course, I won't know that until the end of the month when Memorial Day rolls around and he goes on vacation for at least a week or two. Because that's how he is. He always, whenever he sends somebody an eviction notice, he does it right before he leaves on vacation. Times it so that they get the notice the day he's left or the day after he's left. So, you have that, even less time to get with him on the subject and things. So, I don't know. And if I ask him directly, he'll lie to my face. I've said before he's a Mormon, and they're all, not all, but, the passive aggressiveness is a hallmark, from what I understand, of people who are, intimately familiar with Mormons. And I know it seems crazy to risk everything for a cat, but I have had Duracell for 10 years now, and in 2005, his mother and her 2 brothers were dumped on my doorstep as kittens. And I took care of them, of course. They were just cute little fluff balls. His mother was a whitish cat. I called her Clarice. She was a Siberian tiger Siamese. I think that's the proper terminology for coloration. His one uncle, Kiki, was he was this beautifully swirled gray cat. I've never seen another cat like him at all. He disappeared after about a year. His other uncle, Zeb, had the same patterns and coloration as a friend of mine's short-haired field collie. And that collie was named Zeb, and so that's why I named him Zeb. And he died in, I think, 2011. He had like feline leukemia or something. He was like Duracell in that he disappeared for long periods of time, and he showed up at my door one day looking really sick. And, I let him in and I had to go to work. When I came home, he was dead on my bathroom floor. Yeah, Duracell's mother died on my birthday in 2012. She hung around periodically, and then she showed up and hung around for a week, about 2 weeks, and I realized, oh, she's sick. So I took her to the vet. They pumped her full of drugs and fluids and said, come back in about a week. She seemed to be doing okay, and then, it was the day before payday, so I didn't have any money. She was definitely not well at all, and she died in my arms that day, which was my birthday. And, it was pretty horrible because I'd had her for like 5 or 6 years at that point, maybe 7. So I'm loath to give up on Duracell since I couldn't do anything for his mother and his uncles. But and I suspect, based on her coloration, that Leela's his daughter. I don't know for certain. But so I've got to keep him and her in the house until the landlord's caught all the cats. I think he's caught about half of them now. I've seen today two or three. I'm not sure how many, and I don't know how many he's caught. I know he's caught at least 4, maybe 5, and yes, there were an awful lot of them, and that's like I said, I was trying to get them neutered because I hadn't had any luck getting anybody like a rescue or anything like that, or getting anybody to help me take him to the pound. So it's a regrettable situation, and not that I'm happy about it, but I don't think, I'm not objecting to it because it's the only it's the only solution that can be done, especially with me not having a car. If I had a car, maybe I could haul them somewhere to like a cat rescue or something. But, assuming I could find one that had a space to take him. And I could get a friend with the have a heart traps to come out and get them, or have a heart traps to come out, bring them out. But I don't know. And so, because of all that, I've been having lots of panic attacks, and that's part of the reason why this is late. I didn't even go to work last night. I just spent the whole time curled up in the bed, just shaking, because I'm worried rescuing Duracell has doomed us all, but I couldn't let the guy go. The others, like I said, I'm not bothered by, in the sense that, it's a bad solution, but it's the only solution available to me. But having my stairs demolished and replaced, I don't, without that being discussed with me, that's frustrating, and I don't know why. Like I said, there wasn't anything wrong with the old ones. The ones that he replaced him with aren't, the only thing better about them is that they're newer. It's newer wood. They're not fancy looking stairs. fact, the tread on them is smaller than the tread on the stairs that I did have. Which, that's one of the reasons why I built them the way I did. I wanted a nice wide tread because it's safer that way. But if I raise the issue, I'm the asshole because I'm an ungrateful son of a bitch who is, mad because somebody did me a favor. Never mind the fact that the favor was unwanted and unneeded and that, I'm not an equal to my landlord. I'm a tenant, and therefore less than he is in his eyes. I have to defer to him. I cannot express my own, thoughts on this easily. It's like one of my neighbors one time was going to paint their trailer pink. Well, he told them they couldn't do it. I don't care. Paint it pink. I don't, everything in here is mostly browns and grays and white. There's some, there may be, there's like a slate gray. It's almost a blue. But that's it for the colors. So a little pink would liven the place up, but, he wouldn't let them do it. I don't know why. So I'm sorry. I'm rambling here. I'm still in the depths of a panic attack, and I'm going to have to go to work tonight because I don't want to miss too many days, even though I still have paid sick time. The other thing that happened this weekend was they took my dad to the hospital, and for a while it looked like he was not going to come out. But apparently they got his condition stabilized enough to get him home. And he's got to go for some kind of, they got to go talk to the oncologist here soon because they can't keep putting him in the hospital because he's not going to make it any length of time at all if he keeps having the attacks. Of course, he's too old and frail for them to operate on him and remove the cancer. And even chemo and radiation may be too much for him. They won't know. The issue that has been mentioned in passing, but nobody's really focused on, is the critical one. It's a squamous small cell cancer, I think, is the name of it. Anyways, last year he had one removed from the back of his head. And that's what's growing in his abdominal region that's making it hard for him to breathe. Now, the thing of it is, this means that it's most likely metastasized and spread throughout his system. They haven't done a scan to see if that's the case yet or not, but let's face it, it shows up in two different spots on his body. It's probably metastasized now. Whether or not, I don't know. I don't know what I don't know what my stepmother's thinking. I don't know what my father's thinking. I don't talk to them. I just get text messages saying, well, this is what's happening. This is where we are. And I read them just to keep abreast of the situation. My father is a cross between Donald Trump and Don Draper, so I am not inclined to have much contact with him, especially after some of the things he's done to me and my mother over the years. So anyways, the situation with having 4 cats in the house has been, Fuzznuts and Buttons are growling and hissing at Duracell and Leela. Duracell's not eating right. He'll eat if I come up to him and I pet him for a few minutes, then he'll get up and move and go over to where the food bowl is and eat or drink. But he's obviously stressed and not happy, and I don't know, hopefully all the other cats get rounded up soon and I don't have to keep him in this much longer because I know he doesn't like it. And he's, like I said, got him crapping on the floor, and I'm sure he's crapped other places that I haven't found it yet. And somehow I have managed to lose my glasses. Fortunately, I have a backup pair. They're the pair I wore in high school, so I look really goofy, but I can see. I have no idea what happened to my glasses. They were, on the dresser next to my bed, or the nightstand, rather. They're no longer there. They're not on the floor around it. They're not in the bed. I just don't know. I'm going to have to, once I get Cat's situation solved, I'm going to have to tear this place apart and see if I can't find them. And it's hard for me to search because when I start digging around and looking for something, Buttons immediately decides, that's time to play, and starts bouncing all over me and doing all this stuff. Oh, God, 20 minutes of me rambling about how horrible my life is. I'm sure everybody's going to be thrilled about this. Give me just a second here. Now, I do have some kind of upbeat news and stuff I want to talk about. Since, this is an improvisational episode done on the fly because, well, everything I had planned, I had to throw out. And, too stressed to do much of anything. And it's the first of the month, so let me thank all the people who've supported this show on Patreon. I know I'm making more money now, but, y'all's contribution still helps because that's going towards the car fund, and that's also if I have an emergency and I don't have enough money, I can tap into that to take care of some things. I haven't touched it yet. I'm just letting it build, hopefully till I get enough money to get a car. So it's just sitting there. And I really do appreciate it, especially since I have the unexpected expense of stairs that I hadn't planned on. I mean, the deck roof is a minor rebudgeting, potentially, depending on what the materials cost is. But I haven't gotten that from the landlord yet either, so I don't know. It shouldn't be terribly high. But, thank you. This does, it helps. And Lord knows if I get evicted, I'm going to need all the money I can get. Okay, now for the goodish news. Although, in a minute you'll see why that's not necessarily true. Last year, I heard an interview on the BBC podcast. I'll have a link to that episode in the show notes for this episode, with a woman by the name of Catherine Nixey. And she had written this book. It came out in the UK last year. It just came out in the US this month. And when I heard the interview with her, I was like, oh, I have got to get a copy of this book. It sounds amazing. So, and luckily I was able to pre-order it before I forgot about it, which I did. And then I did probably forget about it until I got a notice from Amazon saying your order had shipped. And I was like, I haven't ordered anything from Amazon lately. What the hell is this? And then I pulled it up and I was like, oh, okay. I vaguely remember that book. The book is called The Darkening Age. Subtitle is The Christian Destruction of the Classical World. I am about a third of the way through this book, and I'll have an Amazon link to it in the show notes, along with that the BBC podcast that she did. My God, it is incredible, and this is not like the Ark Before Noah by Irving Finkel, which was, that book was like a college text or a college course. It was really, really dense. This is just a fantastic read. I mean, it's vividly detailed. There's footnotes and things like that, but she's a great writer. She really is. The story doesn't bog down anywhere. What it is she starts out talking about, the rise of the Christian Church and the Roman Empire and the movements that started with Constantine, where, the Christians began suppressing other religions. She shows how it starts out fairly small and then, builds to a crescendo. I mean, at first it's like, well, you're not going to be picked for plum assignments in government and things like that if you're not a Christian, to, roving bands of thugs smashing temples and burning books and artwork. And she talks about in the introduction to it about how her original goal in the book, when she started the book, was she was going, she talks about these are like the last group of philosophers in Athens. And when the Christians start sacking everything, these group of philosophers decide, well, that's it, we've got to go, and they're going to go to Constantinople. And so her idea is to follow the path that they took to Constantinople, as well as visiting all the other cities that have been ransacked, that were ransacked by Christians at this time, and all the pagan temples and writings and stuff like that had been destroyed. She had to give up on that idea. Why? Because, wait for it, most of the places that she would have visited were being overrun by ISIS. And what was ISIS doing? Trashing the same temples that had either, somehow managed to survive slightly or been reconstructed in the centuries since. So, that's, I don't know if irony is the right word, but that's, it just makes you think about how similar the religions are in so many ways. Let me read a couple of paragraphs from the prologue of this book, just to give you an idea of what it's like. This is the talking about the sack of the Temple of Athena in Palmyra. The handsome, haughty profile of the statue might be far from Athena's native Athens, but it was instantly recognizable, with its straight Grecian nose, its translucent marble skin, and the plump, slightly sulky mouth. The statue's size, it was far taller than any man, might also have impressed. Though perhaps even more admirable than the physical scale was the scale of the imperial infrastructure and ambition that had brought this object here. The statue echoed others that stood on the Athenian Acropolis, well over 1,000 miles away. This particular version had been made in a workshop hundreds of miles from Palmyra, then transported here at considerable difficulty and expense to create a little island of Greco-Roman culture by the sands of the Syrian desert. Did they notice this, the destroyers, as they entered? Were they even fleetingly impressed by the sophistication of an empire that could quarry, sculpt, then transport marble over such vast distances? Did they even for a moment admire the skill that can make a kissably soft-looking mouth out of hard marble? Did they even for a second wonder at its beauty? It seems not. Because when the men entered the temple, they took a weapon and smashed the back of Athena's head with a single blow so hard that it decapitated the goddess. The head fell to the floor, slicing off that nose, crushing the once smooth cheeks. Athena's eyes, untouched, looked out over a now disfigured face. Mere decapitation enough. mere decapitation wasn't enough. More blows fell, scalping Athena, striking the helmet from the goddess's head, smashing it into pieces. Further blows followed. The statue fell from its pedestal. Then the arms and shoulders were chopped off. The body was left on its front in the dirt. The nearby altar was sliced off just above its base. Only then does it seem that these men, these Christians, felt satisfied that their work was done. They melted out once again into the desert. Behind them, the temple fell silent. The votive lamps, no longer tended, went out. On the floor, the head of Athena slowly started to be covered by the sands of the Syrian desert. The triumph of Christianity had begun. And in the podcast that I interview where I heard with her, she talks about how she was raised by her parents. Her father was a former Catholic priest, and her mother was a former nun who they, I guess, met while they were, in the order and, in the church, and decided, no, they really didn't want to be celibate the rest of their lives and got married. And another thing she talks about later on in the book, which is fascinating, and of course now Buttons is walking across in front of the screen. Not that I need it right now, but it's still annoying. Is the whole persecution of Christians by the Romans. Turns out that at best we can document, and by we, she means both secular scholarship and the Catholic Church, that the number of Christians who were martyred by the Romans was nowhere near the number that has been claimed. The number claimed is in the thousands. And according to her, it's most likely in the very low hundreds, if that. And the amount of time that the Christians were persecuted totals to about 13 years. And this wasn't consecutively. And I think Duracell's going to shit on the floor. Hang on. And yes, he did shit on the floor, so I had to clean that up. Okay, now where was I? So, she's talking about, the persecution of the Christians and how a great deal of it has been exaggerated. It was, roughly a total of 13 years, not consecutively, because there was a period of time where one emperor who was in charge had him persecuted. He dies. The next emperor rules. He doesn't have them persecuted. He dies. The emperor after him does. Most of the time when there were still pagan, or rather non-Christian emperors, because as she points out, pagan is actually a slur. Most of the time, the non-Christian emperors did everything they could to ignore the Christians. They just weren't really terribly concerned with it. And as for the whole martyrdom thing, according to her, and she cites various contemporary Roman sources, even some contemporary Christian writings on the subject, the Christians would volunteer to be martyred. And when I say volunteer, I don't mean that they would be arrested for being Christians and then, demand to be martyred, though some did do that. But like if there was an edict passed prohibiting something dealing with Christianity, maybe not necessarily outlawing Christianity, but say an edict passed that says you must sacrifice or offer a sacrifice at the, temple of Caesar or whomever the emperor was at that time. The Christians, rather than, making an offering just to get by, or, not making an offering and hoping nobody noticed that they hadn't done so, the Christians would report themselves to the authorities and say, I'm not going to do it, so you're going to have to kill me. And the accounts of the Romans are that they're bending over backwards and doing anything and everything they can to not have to kill these Christians. And I forget who she quotes on this, but basically, I can't I don't remember if it was a Roman writer, a contemporary Christian writer, or a modern scholar who basically says that the reason so many Christians were eager to be martyred was because that was it was a fast track ticket to heaven. Plus, it was the only way that if you were a nobody, you could gain fame. Sort of like, a lot of the people who do assassinations of political figures or attempt to do assassinations of political figures they're not shooting the person because they disagree with their politics or anything like that. They're just failures in life and their ego can't handle it. So they want to be famous and known for something. So they go out and they whack a politician, or they shoot up, in the U.S., they shoot up a school or a business or something like that. That's how that works. And the same was true with these Christians at that time, apparently, that they were, hungry for fame and attention. And as she points out, well, if your life is shit and you have no hope of being able to better your life, why wouldn't you opt for death when you're promised that death will give you a better life? You will, if you're martyred, you go straight to heaven and you live in this fantastical paradise, blah, blah, blah. Well, if you're a beggar on the streets, which would you prefer? To continue being a beggar on the streets or live this fantastical life? Okay, so you gotta die first, but hey, as long as you believe in God and you're dead for a holy cause, there you go. You're going to heaven. And there's some, let me see if I can find the name. I'm just getting to this part of the book. Hang on. Here it is. Other Christians who were deprived of execution turned instead to suicide. In 4th century North Africa, locals watched in horror as faithful and deranged men, because they loved the name martyr and because they desired human praise more than divine charity, they killed themselves. The methods of suicide varied, but drowning, setting oneself on fire, and jumping off cliffs were among the most popular. Whatever the method, the aim was always the same: martyrdom, eternal glory in heaven, and eternal flame on earth. Or so it was hoped. The group most famous for practicing this were known as circumcellions. The unwieldy name most probably came from their lifestyle. They were farm workers who had a habit of hanging around, the cellars, celia of farms. As academic Brent D. Shaw has argued, as itinerant farm workers, circumcellions were near the bottom of an extremely hierarchical empire. Their lives were difficult, precarious, and grim. Commit suicide, however, and they would become not only a member of the most worshipped people on earth, but be sped to a prize seat in heaven. Sounds an awful lot like suicide bombers, doesn't it? But hey, Christianity and Islam, completely different in how they act. Now, one thing that has popped into my head that, I haven't quite figured out, it's not a solidified idea or anything, so I can't really articulate. But, it goes back to something that Lawrence Wright talks about in his book, Going Clear, which, as you'll recall, is the expose of Scientology that was eventually made into a documentary by HBO. That was, that's pretty disturbing to watch, even though it didn't tell half the story. But he talks about how in their infancy, all religions have a violent period and they grow out of them. And I'm wondering, what if it's not the religions, so much as it is that, there's something about the human species that every, like lemmings are supposed to have done, but don't actually do. Periodically we just have to go through this violent period where we trash everything that has gone before. And, then we end up with a period of backwardness. I forget the exact point, but there is, years ago in the late 90s, I remember reading a column, where somebody was asking, and this was before 9/11, they were asking, well, why does Islam seem to be so backwards, considering, they were once an enlightened part of the world. Much of what we have of Greek and Roman writings comes to us because it was preserved by the, in the Mideast. Whereas, the Christians destroyed it. And the argument that this person made, and I'm not going to claim it was an authoritative argument or anything like that, but it was just it's an interesting idea, is that what set the Islamic world back was when the Western European powers during the Crusades sacked cities in the Mideast that were home to vast libraries. And it may not have been even that far back in history as the Crusades. I think it was, somebody has made the case that it was in the late 15th century when the Spanish kicked the Muslims out of Spain, and the libraries at Tornado were, some of the best in the world, and they fell into European hands, and so the loss of knowledge is what set them back in the Islamic world. I don't know. I'm not qualified to comment on that. But, you have to look at that, and you have to look at the destruction of our culture that's currently going on now, thanks to Donald Trump and his cronies, and wonder what kind of setbacks we're going to face. I'm not pinning my hopes on Mueller removing him. It could happen. But I just don't, I'm going to be slightly pessimistic on that front because, we don't know what the outcome of the midterms are going to be like. We don't know how, how much they'll change the composition of Congress. For impeachment to go forward, you've got to have, the House votes to impeach, the Senate holds the trial. If the Democrats don't have large enough majorities in both houses, then you won't get a vote to impeach that's successful. And even if the Democrats control the House but not the Senate, you won't get him removed from office because they'll send it over there, and then the Senate will be like, yeah, whatever. The Republicans will no doubt just say, no, he's our guy. We got to support him. It doesn't matter how overwhelming the evidence might be. We're just going to have to see. And even if they get him out of there this year or next year, the only hope we have of seeing significant change in what all has happened won't come until 2021 at the earliest, because we'll have to have a Democratic president. We'll have to have a Congress which is overwhelmingly Democratic. for the things to get pushed through. And, I mean, we don't know. Right now, we have no idea who's going to be the Democratic candidates for president, let alone who the nominee will be. I mean, so far as I know, there's only one Democratic candidate who's declared himself, and that's a guy by the name of Andrew Yang. And, you know, I know what you're saying. Who? And that's what I was saying when I saw the piece on it. And in looking up Andrew Yang, he's not really notable for anything. I mean, he's, you know, held some executive positions, but they're not at any really huge companies. He was president of Kaplan, which was a training service so you can pass college tests and college courses and things like that. For a while, he's worked for a couple of charitable foundations and been a corporate lawyer. So he's not like, say, a Mark Zuckerberg or somebody who, you know, ran a tech company and got really rich off of that. He doesn't seem to be poor because he has had a couple of businesses that he's managed to sell for some money, but he's not hugely wealthy and certainly not well known. He's a fairly young gentleman. He's only 43, so even if he doesn't succeed this time, he can still run later on. He'd be the first Asian American to be president. It'd be kind of interesting to see if he got it. And, you know, if we went African American male, Asian American male, and then a woman for president. We'll just have to see how it goes. But, you know, and who knows what kind of traction he'll get or anything like that, because his big talking point is universal basic income. He wants to give everybody $1,000 a month. And an extra $12,000 a year would certainly help me out and a lot of other people. But I have a feeling that were he to do that, the first thing that would happen is my rent would go up by $1,000 a month because, hey, landlord's going to say, you've got extra money. I'm going to raise the rent. And that's, you know, and maybe my landlord wouldn't do that, but there are plenty of sleazeball landlords out there, one of whom happens to be president, who would certainly do that because they can. So we'll just have to see. But, all right. It is rambling and incoherent on me, I know, and it's getting time where I've got to get ready for work. My apologies for not getting this out sooner. Patreon supporters, you will get your bonus episode sometime this week, probably this weekend. It just depends on how things go. I don't know what work is going to be like. Since I was out last night, I know things were looking kind of slow, but you'll get that lost episode that I did and didn't like and didn't have time to redo. And I will keep everybody posted on what's going on with the landlord, et cetera, et cetera. If I run into him, and I'll have a talk with him and see what's up with that. I don't know. It's just awfully stressful for me. Yesterday morning, I called a friend of mine in tears, just crying about everything because I was so stressed out. Because, I don't want to lose where I live. And I also, I don't want to give up any of the cats that I have in the house right now. Duracell, Fuzz-Nuts, Buttons, and even Leela. I mean, she's poor little thing. She with only one eye. And she's not a big meaty cat. She's really small frame, so being an outdoor kitty would probably be rough on her. That's what she wants to be part of the time. That would be fine, but I don't know. I'm just doing what I can, and hopefully it all works out. So, anyways, I'm going to get out of here. Next episode will be the Apocrypha. I think it's the last of the stuff Skullbeard and I did. I still have to pull that file up and, finish editing it. If it's not the last, it's the next to the last, because I know we did one session that wrapped it up, and I think I was going to get 3 episodes out of it. I don't remember. And I don't know if I've gotten 2 episodes out of that or if I've just gotten the 1. And even if I've gotten 1 episode out of it, doesn't mean there's going to be 2 more. But once we get into the that stuff from the Ethiopian Apocrypha that's only been translated into Rastafarianism, that's a hell of a lot more interesting. And not merely from a subject matter, but the cadence of it is really good. It has a very black gospel preacher feel to it. The rhythm and the cadence. I don't know. I'm sure that doesn't come from the underlying text, and so I don't know if I guess that's how the translators shaped it. But you'll hear, because as we read along, it gets really hard for Skullbeard and I to it just becomes, as it goes along, we realize it's easier if we read it in the cadence. So you get you get a really good feel for it. I'm rambling. I'm sorry. Okay. I'm getting out of here now. Thank everybody for their support, and I will talk to you soon.
That's it for this episode of The Atheist in the Trailer Park Podcast. You can subscribe to the show on iTunes, Stitcher, as well as just about anywhere else podcasts can be found. Many of the episodes are also on YouTube. Follow the show on Twitter. @TParkAtheist is the show's Twitter handle. It's on Facebook at facebook.com/trailerparkatheist.com. If you happen to like the podcast, please rate it on iTunes. If you'd like to support the podcast, there's a donate button on the show notes page. You can support it via Patreon at patreon.com/TNTucker. Thanks for listening.
Say goodnight, Fuzz-Nuts.
All I know is this violates every canon of respectable broadcasting.
Damned cat.